I have always believed that there is nothing more important for a woman of my generation than knowing how to dress for the occasion. Today was a special occasion, my grandson Eric's graduation, so I chose a light blue silk suit and the pearl earrings my late husband had given me for our 30th anniversary. Looking at myself in the mirror, I fixed a gray strand that had fallen out of my neat hairdo and nodded to my reflection with satisfaction. At 67, I looked great, and no one would dare call me an old woman. The keys to the new Mercedes were pleasantly cold in my palm. The car had been my little gift to myself after a successful deal with a gas station chain that had agreed to open locations near my 3 motels. Net income was up 20% for the quarter. It was a sin not to treat myself. Merritt and Zelma's house was in an upscale part of town. You had to make a good living for a house like that. It was ironic that my son, who had chosen a career as a financial advisor, constantly needed my financial support. I parked at the gate and looked at my watch, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, perfectly on time. Punctuality is the foundation of any business and a sign of respect for one's partners. Too bad Merritt never learned that lesson. Zelma opened the door, and her smile faded slightly as her gaze fell on my car. "New car, Vernetta?" she asked in a tone that was a mixture of surprise and mild irritation. "It looks expensive." "A Mercedes S-Class," I replied, not hiding my pride. "My little joy in my old age. You know I've always preferred to invest in safe assets." Zelma pressed her lips together. She'd always thought my spending was unnecessary, though she didn't deny herself designer items. But that was another thing that bothered her. Every dollar I spent was a dollar they wouldn't inherit. "Eric will be thrilled," she finally said. "He's at his place getting ready. Merritt is handling the drinks in the backyard. The catering just arrived, and I honestly don't know what to tell them. Maybe you—" "Sure." I nodded and headed into the kitchen, where unfamiliar people in white uniforms were bustling about. I immediately assessed the situation. A young chef was unsure of his tasks, 2 waiters were arranging glasses incorrectly, and a girl with a clipboard was nervously checking the grocery list. No system, no organization. I sighed and stepped forward. 15 minutes later, the kitchen was running like clockwork. I reassigned duties, adjusted the order in which the food was served, and approved the final arrangement of the serving tables. The young chef gratefully accepted my help. After all, 30 years of running a motel chain had taught me how to organize any process efficiently. Zelma watched me from the doorway, her gaze darting between me and the set tables. "You've really turned things around," she said with a mixture of admiration and frustration. "Just minor adjustments to optimize the process," I smiled. "Don't worry, I'm not taking over the script for tonight. It's entirely your brainchild." Eric came down in his graduation suit, tall, with an open smile, so much like his grandfather. My heart squeezed with tenderness. "Grandma!" He hugged me, not caring if he wrinkled the suit. "You look amazing." "You too, young man." I stepped back to admire him. A real man. Grandpa would be proud. We didn't have time to talk. The first guests arrived and the house was filled with voices, laughter, and congratulations. I watched how Eric accepted compliments, how casually he socialized with his peers. This boy will go far if he gets the right support. Merritt appeared next to me holding a glass of whiskey. His tie was slightly off to the side and his eyes glittered a little too brightly. "Mom, thanks for taking over the catering." He patted my shoulder. "I can always count on you." "Just helped with the organization." I shrugged. "You got an early start on the drinks today." Merritt grimaced. "Graduation day for his only son is reason enough, don't you think?" I didn't argue. Merritt was always finding reasons. His father was the same way. Fortunately, my grandson has more character than I do. The party went on as usual. I went from group to group, making small talk with the parents of Eric's classmates. Most of them were much younger than me, but in the business circles of Little Paducah, I was known as a successful businesswoman, and many were interested in my opinion on recent economic developments. Near 8 o'clock that evening, Merritt rang his glass, attracting the attention of his guests. His face flushed and his movements became a little more sprawling, a sure sign that he had had too much to drink. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I want to thank everyone who has come to share this special day with us. My son, Eric." He gave a touching speech about his son that made me feel proud. Despite all our differences, Merritt was a good father. Then he raised a glass to the teachers, to Eric's friends, to the future of the younger generation. And of course, he added with a smile that suddenly seemed too strained for me, I'd like to introduce you to our amazing waitress for tonight, my mother, Vernetta Coleman. There was an awkward silence in the room. A few people smiled uncertainly, not realizing if it was a joke or not. Eric turned sharply to his father, indignation reflected on his face. Zelma pretended to correct a flower arrangement. I felt the blood rush to my face, not from embarrassment, from anger. For 30 years, I'd run the business that fed this family. 30 years making important decisions, signing contracts, managing dozens of employees. And now my own son is trying to make me look like a servant in front of all these people? I approached Merritt slowly, smiling the way I smiled in business negotiations when I was preparing to deliver a decisive blow. It's strange to hear this from a man who still asks me for my signature on every major loan, I said loud enough for everyone to hear. By the way, how was your last loan, Merritt? Did the bank approve it? The smile disappeared from my son's face. He turned pale, then red, opened his mouth but didn't answer. I saw understanding in the eyes of several of the guest business people are quick to grasp the point. Some looked away, others took a sip from their glasses, trying to hide their embarrassment. I apologize, I turned back to the guests, maintaining impeccable politeness. Apparently, my son is too emotional today. I hope you will forgive this little family scene. Then I calmly walked to the table where my purse was lying, took out a pre-prepared envelope and headed towards Eric. Congratulations on your graduation, dear. I handed him an envelope containing a check for an impressive sum. This is for your future education. Use it wisely. Eric looked at me with wide-open eyes that read embarrassment mixed with gratitude. Thank you, grandmother, he murmured. You don't have to go. I have things to do. I squeezed his hand gently. Call me tomorrow. We'll talk. I headed for the exit, feeling the stares of those present. Merritt stood motionless, as if struck by thunder. Zelma made a movement as if she wanted to stop me, but changed her mind. Once outside, I took a deep breath of the evening air. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled out my car keys. Not out of fear, out of anger and frustration. It's been so many years, and Merritt still sees me as a mother who has to cook, clean, and silently bear any inconvenience. He doesn't see me as someone who has built a successful business, someone whose business decisions have ensured him a trouble-free life. As I sat behind the wheel of the Mercedes, I closed my eyes for a moment. Maybe I had been too harsh. Maybe I shouldn't have made a scene at my grandson's birthday party. But how much more could I take? After all, I'm not just someone's mother or grandmother. I'm Vernetta Coleman, owner of the Coleman Lodge chain of motels, a respected figure in the business community. The morning after Eric's graduation was sunny and windless. I arrived at the office earlier than usual, 7 o'clock in the morning, to catch up on the work I had missed because of yesterday's event. My office was located on the second floor of the Coleman Lodge office building, overlooking the city's main thoroughfare. Touching the wooden countertop, I experienced a familiar sense of calm. Here, among the files, charts, and financial reports, I felt in my element. My phone vibrated. There was a message from Eric. Grandma, I'm sorry about yesterday. Talk to you later? I smiled. Nothing was the boy's fault, and I didn't want him to feel bad about his father's behavior. Sure, honey. Stop by my office when it's convenient, I replied and put the phone away. I devoted the next 2 hours to quarterly reports. 3 of the 5 motels were showing steady growth, 1 was holding steady, and the oldest, on the outskirts of town, needed renovations. I was making notes in my notebook when there was a knock at the door. Come in, I answered without lifting my head from my papers. Vernetta, am I interrupting? I looked up and saw Eleanor Greenwood, the assistant to Thomas Barton, the owner of the gas station chain we'd recently partnered with. Eleanor was in her 60s, recently retired after 30 years with Thomas. I had always respected her professionalism and insight. Eleanor, what a pleasant surprise. I stood up to greet her. Have a seat. What brings you to me? She sat down across from me, nervously fixing her gray hair in a neat bun. I was passing by, actually, and I thought... She hesitated. Vernetta, we've known each other for many years, and I've always valued our professional friendship. Something in her tone made me wary. Eleanor had never been prone to social visits without a reason. Of course, I nodded. Is something wrong? She took a deep breath. Maybe I'm minding my own business, but I wish someone would do the same for me if I were in a similar situation. I put my pen down and straightened up. I'm listening. Yesterday, I visited my Aunt Marge at the Sunset Valley nursing home. Do you know that place? I shook my head. I've heard of it, but I've never been there. It's a decent place on the western edge of town. Not the cheapest, but well cared for. Eleanor paused. So I was in my aunt's room when I saw your son and his wife through the window. They were checking out the grounds with the receptionist. My heart skipped a beat. Are you sure it was Merritt and Zelma? Positive. I know your family well, Vernetta. Besides, she wrinkled her nose slightly. We crossed paths in the hall as I was leaving. They looked embarrassed to see me. Zelma was quick to say they were visiting some distant relative, but I know for a fact they have no one there. My aunt knows all the residents. She's been there for 4 years. I tried to keep a calm expression on my face, though I was growing uneasy inside. Perhaps they really were visiting someone. Vernetta, Eleanor stepped forward, lowering her voice. They weren't visiting. They were looking around. Rooms, common areas, asking questions about procedures. I overheard part of their conversation with the receptionist on my way out. Zelma said, "My mother-in-law is stubborn, but we are already collecting the documents. Hopefully by the fall we'll have the matter resolved." My hands involuntarily clenched into fists. By the fall. That's when I'll be 68. I understand, I said in a steady voice. Thank you for telling me, Eleanor. I hope I didn't overstep my bounds. She looked worried. It didn't seem right that they were planning something like this behind your back. I mean, you're your own person, and in perfect health, as far as I know. You did the right thing. I allowed myself a slight smile. And yes, I am in good health. My last medical checkup confirmed it. We talked for a few more minutes about Eleanor's pension, about her plans to travel, about her grandchildren, but my thoughts were far away. When she left, I leaned back in my chair trying to make sense of what I'd heard. My own son and his wife are planning to put me in a nursing home, without my knowledge, without my consent. It was as if I was no longer capable of making decisions. I opened my laptop and typed Sunset Valley Nursing Home into the search engine. A professionally done website popped up with pictures of well-maintained grounds, bright rooms, and smiling seniors. Providing a dignified old age since 2012, the slogan read. The cost of living started at $4,000 a month and increased depending on the care required. That's a lot of money, especially considering that Merritt had always had trouble with finances. I started looking through the terms and conditions section, how to become a resident, and came across an interesting clause. If a prospective resident is unable to make an independent decision about admission, a report from a medical committee and the consent of a legal representative are required. So that's it. They want to declare me incompetent. There was another knock on the door, and I quickly closed the tab. My secretary, Doris, came in. Mrs. Coleman, everything is ready for the 2-hour video conference with the vendors, and samples of the new staff uniforms have arrived. Thank you, Doris. I gathered up the scattered papers. I'll be there in 5 minutes, and please order coffee for 3. We'll take a short break at 3:30. The next hours passed in the routine of business negotiations. Usually I enjoyed the process, but today I found it hard to concentrate. My thoughts kept returning to Eleanor's words and what might be behind Merritt's actions. The conference ended at 4 o'clock, and I was finally able to return to my thoughts. More information was needed, something concrete, not just suspicions based on an overheard conversation. Deciding to check my email, I noticed a strange email that had arrived a few hours ago. The sender's address belonged to Merritt, but was sent to me. The subject line read, FW, Legal Advice on VK Case, VK, my initials. Opening the email, I saw that it was a forwarded message, apparently by mistake. It began a chain of emails that Merritt had exchanged with one Gerald Higgins, a lawyer specializing in family law. Merritt wrote, Dear Mr. Higgins, thank you for your consultation. As we discussed, my mother, Vernetta Coleman, age 67, has recently been showing signs of cognitive impairment that make her unable to manage her financial affairs. She makes impulsive decisions. She recently purchased an expensive automobile, exhibits irritability, and has become suspicious of her family. Following your advice, my wife and I prepared a list of her oddities over the past 6 months and made an appointment with Dr. Weissman for a medical report. We have also looked at Sunset Valley Nursing Home and feel it is a suitable option. As far as financing a stay there, do you think we can use funds from her business, given that I will be appointed manager of her assets after she is declared incapacitated? Would I be able to sell some of the business to cover expenses? Sincerely, Merritt Coleman. I reread the letter twice, not believing my eyes. My son must have clicked forward instead of reply. An inexcusable mistake for someone who considers himself qualified to manage my business. That oversight revealed his entire plan to me. Merritt didn't just want to send me to a nursing home, he wanted to take over my business. A business I'd spent decades building, putting my heart and soul into. There were several other letters in the correspondence. I looked through them all, and the picture grew clearer and darker. Merritt had been hatching this plan for some time. In one of the letters from 3 months ago, he had asked the same lawyer if the gift could be challenged if it was signed by a person with early stages of dementia. Dementia! Me! I closed the mail and stood up. I needed to move to deal with the emotions that had come over me. I walked to the window and stared out at the cityscape without seeing it. My hand involuntarily clutched my phone like a weapon. Well, now I knew what I was dealing with, but I needed more information. If Merritt was willing to go this far, maybe he'd already taken some concrete steps. I went back to my desk and dialed my bank's number. After a few seconds of waiting, the familiar voice of Margaret King, a manager I'd worked with for many years, answered. Margaret, good afternoon. This is Vernetta Coleman. I have a question about account security. Have there been any recent requests for access to my accounts from anyone other than myself? Hello, Mrs. Coleman. Margaret sounded slightly surprised. Let me just take a minute to check. Yes, indeed. 3 times in the last month, your son, Mr. Merritt Coleman, has made inquiries about your accounts. According to protocol, we didn't provide the information because he didn't have power of attorney. He claimed to be acting with your consent but was unable to provide the necessary documents. I felt a chill run down my spine. Thank you, Margaret. I'd like to make some additional security arrangements. No information about my accounts should be shared with third parties, including family members, without my personal presence and passport. And please report any such requests to me immediately. Of course, Mrs. Coleman. I'll make the appropriate notations right away. After speaking to the bank, I called my accountant and gave similar instructions. Then I contacted the managers of all 5 motels to make sure none of them had received any strange requests on my behalf. By 5 p.m., I had a complete picture. Merritt had been methodical, but so far unsuccessful. He'd tried to access information about my finances through the bank, the accounting department, and even the IRS, posing as my trustee. Fortunately, everywhere required official documents, which he didn't have. I checked my mail again. The mistakenly forwarded letter had been sent from Merritt's personal address. He was probably working in a hurry or upset after last night, and his carelessness had played into my hands. But how long would it last? If he got a medical opinion that I was incapacitated, the situation could change dramatically. I was sitting in my chair pondering my next steps when an idea popped into my head. If Merritt wants to use Sunset Valley against me, why don't I turn the situation in my favor? I picked up the phone and dialed the number of Alan Foster, my lawyer and friend for 20 years. Alan, good evening. This is Vernetta Coleman. I have an urgent matter for you. Vernetta, good to hear from you. What's up? I need complete information on Sunset Valley Nursing Home. Who owns it? Financial status, outlook, anything you can find. Sunset Valley? Alan sounded surprised. May I ask what you're after? I took a deep breath, confident in my decision. I want to buy it. Eric called the day after my conversation with Alan. I was just going over the preliminary report on Sunset Valley that my lawyer had emailed. The nursing home was owned by a small private company called Silver Age, which owned 2 other similar facilities in neighboring counties. Judging by the financials, the business was profitable, but the owners were considering selling due to conflict between the partners. Grandma, aren't you busy? Eric's voice sounded a little nervous. I'd like to talk. In person. We agreed to meet at my office by 1 o'clock. Putting the documents aside, I thought about Eric. He'd always been closer to me than Merritt. Perhaps because grandchildren don't carry the weight of past resentments and disappointments that inevitably accumulate between parents and children. Or maybe it's just that he was like me in character, just as thoughtful, observant, analytical. As a child, he often came to visit me on weekends. Merritt and Zelma were happy to send their son away for a couple of days, and I had real adventures with him. Fishing, collecting minerals, building model airplanes. He was always interested in how things worked. At 12, he fixed my broken laptop himself, and at 15, he created the first simple website for my business. By 1 o'clock, I had put all my business aside and sent Doris to lunch so no one would interrupt our conversation. Eric arrived exactly at the appointed time. That punctuality always pleased me. You look tired, I said, hugging my grandson. At our house. It's hard now. He ran his hand tiredly through his hair, a gesture inherited from his grandfather. I gestured for him to sit down and listened attentively to his story. After the incident at the party, the atmosphere in the house had become unbearable. Merritt and Zelma fought constantly. She accused him of ruining everything with his antics, and he snapped that she didn't understand the gravity of the situation. When I asked what situation we were talking about, Eric lowered his eyes and told me about his father's serious financial problems. Merritt had taken out several loans. Something had gone wrong with one major client, and now he was barely keeping up with the payments. Zelma was furious and kept saying that he had to work it out with Grandma before it was too late. I kept a neutral expression on my face, although anger was building up inside. Financial irresponsibility had always been Merritt's hallmark, but using me as a solution to their problems was too much. And what did they think it meant to solve me? I asked calmly. Eric was visibly embarrassed. He began to talk evasively about how my parents were worried about my health, that they thought I should work less, that at my age it was time to rest. Sometimes the conversation turned to the subject of inheritance and how to handle the business. What about the nursing home? Sunset Valley, if I'm not mistaken. My question made Eric flinch. Do you know about that? He blushed and lowered his head. Yes, they went there. Several times. Eric admitted that his parents talked about the nursing home as a for my own good solution. They said I would be better off among my peers under the care of professionals because I was working too hard at my age. And you believe that? I asked, watching his reaction carefully. No. He looked me straight in the eye. I heard them talking about money, about being able to manage your accounts and your business if I was declared incompetent, I finished for him. Eric nodded, his face a mixture of shame and relief. He apologized for not telling me sooner, explaining that his silence was because it was his parents. I reassured him, explaining that he was not to blame for his parents' decisions. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I pondered the situation. Eric was in a difficult position, between his parents and his grandmother. I shouldn't have exacerbated his internal conflict. Eric, I finally said, I have a business proposal for you. I explained that I wanted to modernize the reservation system for my motels. The current program was outdated, and the business needed something more modern, with a mobile app, integration with aggregator sites, and real-time analytics. Eric's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. He had just studied the development of such systems in his final year and had even done a project on the subject. I outlined the terms: an official contract, market pay for a beginner, real experience for a resume, and references from a well-known business in the city. His enthusiasm faded a bit when he talked about possible parental disapproval. I assured him that this was purely a business proposition, unrelated to family conflict. I'm offering him a job because I believe in his potential. Potential that his parents don't seem to notice. Those words clearly struck a nerve with him. Eric straightened up and agreed that his father had always thought programming was a waste of time and insisted he go into finance. I remarked with a smile that the reservation system was also about finance, about how to make money efficiently. We agreed that Eirik would come to the office 3 times a week and work remotely the rest of the time. I showed him the office, which was becoming his workplace, and introduced him to Doris, who had returned from lunch and reported a call from Alan Foster. The conversation with the lawyer was short and productive. The owners of Sunset Valley were interested in my proposal, especially the possibility of a quick deal. We agreed to meet the following week and prepare the necessary documents. When I returned to Eirik, I found him studying the current reservation system. He commented on the outdated interface with a smile, and we discussed the first steps to modernize it. The next 2 weeks flew by in the hustle and bustle of work. Eirik enthusiastically took on the project, spending much more time in the office than we had originally agreed. Merritt called several times, apologizing for the prom scene, but I kept a cool head and declined invitations to family dinners, citing busyness. Meanwhile, the negotiation process with the owners of Sunset Valley was well underway. My offer was higher than the market price, but I insisted on an expedited closing and minimal publicity. I didn't want Merritt to find out my plans before my time. Each evening as I drove home, I reflected on the situation. Wasn't I being overly dramatic? Wouldn't it be better to just talk to my son straight? But then I remembered his arrogant smile when he called me a waitress, and how systematically he tried to access my accounts. No, talking wasn't going to help. Merritt only understands the language of power and money. On Friday, toward evening, I stayed late in the office, studying the business plan for the reorganization of Sunset Valley. I had formed an idea to turn part of the complex into a state-of-the-art co-working center for older entrepreneurs, a concept that was just beginning to gain popularity in major cities. Eirik knocked and entered my office. I tried to quickly minimize the documents on the screen, but he managed to spot the name Sunset Valley. Sunset Valley? Eirik raised his eyebrows in surprise. You're researching this place? I realized it was time for a frank conversation. Inviting him to sit down, I bluntly said, I'm not just researching Sunset Valley, I'm buying it. Eirik froze, stunned by my confession. When he asked for reasons, I explained that it was a good investment, an aging population, a growing demand for quality care services, a promising line of business. And that's the only reason? He asked skeptically. No, of course not, I smiled. There is another. Your parents were planning to send me there against my will. Now, if they try to do that, they'll be sending me to my own business. Eirik shook his head, recognizing that my actions were impressive and a little scary. Not in a bad way, but in their determination and strategic approach. I agreed. Business is a lot like a chess game, especially when someone is trying to checkmate you. He lowered his gaze, recognizing that his father would be furious when he found out. I gently reminded him that Merritt's motives weren't so honorable. Eirik was silent for a while, then admitted that the situation with his father was worse than he had first thought. Yesterday, he overheard his parents' phone conversation by chance and learned that Merritt was nearly $500,000 in debt. He had taken out a loan against the house, but it wasn't enough, and now the bank was threatening foreclosure. This information explained Merritt's desperate attempts to gain control of my finances. His situation was truly critical. Grandma, what's going to happen next? Eirik asked, with concern in his voice. I mean, with the family. I walked up to him and put my hand on his shoulder. I don't know, Eirik, it's not up to me alone. But whatever happens, remember, you don't have to choose sides. You can love your parents and have a relationship with me at the same time. He expressed concern that his parents would find out about his work with me, and that he knew about the Sunset Valley purchase and hadn't told them. I reminded him that he only found out now and asked him to keep that information confidential until the deal was finalized. It's a business secret, Eirik, not family drama, I said. He hesitantly agreed, admitting that it was hard for him to lie to his parents. I assured him that I wasn't asking him to lie, just not to bring it up. If asked directly, he would tell them that it was my business and that he didn't think it was right to discuss my business decisions behind my back. To lighten the mood, I suggested we call it a night and go to a steakhouse nearby for dinner. Eirik agreed, but I could see that his smile didn't reach his eyes. As I watched him during dinner, I reflected on the position I had put my grandson in. He was caught between two fires, and unlike Merritt and me, He couldn't just walk away from this situation. Whatever happened next, he would have to deal with the consequences of our actions. The Sunset Valley deal was closed in record time 3 weeks instead of the usual 2 to 3 months. Alan and I paid a premium for speed and confidentiality, but it was worth it. The nursing home was now officially mine, or rather the New Horizon Company, which I was the sole owner of. Eric continued to work on the reservation system, and judging by the intermediate results, the project was progressing well. Thursday morning, I got a call from Merritt. "Mom, we need to talk." His voice sounded strained. "Zelma and I would like to come over tonight." "What's this about, Merritt?" I tried to sound neutral. "Family business. Important," he said awkwardly. I suppressed the urge to laugh. "My welfare, how very thoughtful." "All right, be here by 6 p.m., I agreed. "I'll be home." The day passed in the usual routine, but my thoughts kept returning to the upcoming conversation. I knew that Merritt and Zelma would come with an offer or a demand for Sunset Valley. They didn't realize I already owned the place and had probably prepared a whole speech about how good I'd be there. Well, they were in for a surprise. I returned home earlier than usual to prepare for the meeting. My house, a spacious 2-story colonial-style mansion, had been built when John, my late husband, was still alive. In 30 years, I'd never gotten around to selling it, though it was a bit large for a single woman. Perhaps I'm too sentimental, an unacceptable luxury for a businesswoman. I made coffee and set up the cups in the living room. Then I took out the Sunset Valley file and put it on the table, not in plain sight, but not too far away. Let it be handy when the time came. At exactly 6 o'clock in the evening, the doorbell rang. Merritt and Zelma stood on the threshold with strained smiles. Zelma held a folder of some kind, probably brochures about Sunset Valley. "Come in." I gestured them into the living room. "Coffee?" "Yes, thank you." Zelma sat down on the couch, carefully placing the folder next to her. Merritt looked tense. He shifted awkwardly from foot to foot before sitting down in the chair across from me. I poured the coffee and sat down, looking at them expectantly. "So, what did you want to talk about?" They looked at each other, as if deciding who would start. Zelma gave a slight nod to Merritt, and he coughed. "Mother, Zelma and I have been thinking a lot about you lately," he began. "About your age, your health, well-being." "I'm perfectly fine. Thank you for your concern," I replied dryly. "Of course you're fine now," Zelma interjected in her most judicious tone. "But we're thinking about the future. You're about to turn 68, and although you look great, the years are taking their toll." "And what do they take?" I raised an eyebrow. "My memory is fine. My blood pressure is normal. My joints don't bother me. I go for a 1-hour walk every day and swim in the pool once a week." "It's not just physical health," Merritt said, stepping forward. "You work too much. It's stress, constant strain. At your age, you should be resting, enjoying life." "I enjoy my work," I countered. "And by the way, my business has never been more successful than it is now." "But you're all alone in this big house." Zelma looked around the living room. "It's hard for us to keep an eye on you living across town. What if something happens? If you fall down, get sick?" I grinned. "I don't need looking after, Zelma. And as far as I can remember, you've never really looked after me." They looked at each other again. Zelma opened a folder and pulled out glossy brochures. "Vernetta, we found a great place." She handed me a brochure. "Sunset Valley is no ordinary nursing home. It's an active retirement community. It has a pool, a library, a movie room, a garden." I picked up the brochure and slowly flipped through pages of smiling seniors playing golf, practicing yoga, and chatting in cozy living rooms. "It looks nice," I said neutrally. "We've already found out." Merritt spoke faster, clearly encouraged by my restrained response. "There are separate cottages there for those who prefer independence. You could live in your own cottage, but still enjoy all the services of the complex. And medical care is available 24 hours a day." "And how much does it cost?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Not cheap," Merritt admitted. "But you have the means. Besides, by selling this house, you'll cover a lot of the costs. That's it." Now the conversation turned to money, the real reason for their visit. "What about the business?" I looked directly at my son. "Who's going to run the motels while I play bridge at Sunset Valley?" Merritt perked up. I could take over, he exclaimed with an enthusiasm he couldn't quite conceal. My experience in finance will come in handy. I've long wanted to be more involved in the family business. Family business? I raised an eyebrow. As I recall, you were never interested in motels. You called it a dirty business for the uneducated and went to school for finance. Merritt blushed. I was young and stupid. Now I realize the value of what you've built. And I want to keep it for the family. For Eirik. At the mention of my grandson, I felt a prick of guilt. Eirik had come between us in this war. But then I remembered how Merritt had tried to access my accounts and guilt was replaced by determination. You know, Merritt, I set my cup down on the table. Let's be honest. This whole thing, I pointed to the brochures, isn't about my well-being. It's about money. Your debts, to be precise. His face froze. What are you talking about? Your $500,000 debt, a home equity loan you can't pay off, about the bank that's threatening to foreclose. Zelma inhaled convulsively and Merritt turned pale. Who told you that? He whispered. Is it important? I shrugged my shoulders. What matters is that instead of coming to me and being honest about your problems, you decided to put me in a nursing home and take over my business. That's not true, Merritt exclaimed, but his eyes were running, giving away the lie. It isn't. I leaned forward. Then why did you try 3 times to get information about my bank accounts? Why did you consult with a lawyer about the possibility of declaring me incompetent? Why were you preparing a list of my oddities for Dr. Weissman? Merritt jumped up, his face contorted with anger and shame. You followed me? I didn't need to be followed. I remained calm. People talk, Merritt, especially when it comes to money. Zelma put her hand on her husband's shoulder, trying to reassure him, but he shook it off. You've always treated me like this, he shouted. Always! Your precious business has always been more important than me. When I was a kid, you missed my school plays because of meetings with vendors. You didn't come to my graduation because you were opening a new motel. Even now, you don't ask why I'm in debt. You're only interested in your money. I felt a twinge inside. There was some truth in his words. I had indeed missed quite a few important moments in his life because of business. But that didn't justify his current actions. You're not a mother. You're a CEO who accidentally gave birth to a son. He threw it in my face. I slowly stood up. Those words hurt, but I wasn't about to show my vulnerability. You're right, Merritt, I said calmly. I'm a businesswoman to the core. That's why I know your debts are the result of your decisions, not my mistakes. I walked over to the table, picked up the file folder, and handed it to him. Speaking of business decisions, I bought Sunset Valley. Merritt stared at me, not understanding. What? I own Sunset Valley now. I pointed to the documents in his hands. The deal closed last week. I plan to reorganize part of the complex into a co-working center for senior entrepreneurs. I think it will be profitable. Zelma opened her mouth, but couldn't utter a word. Merritt shifted his gaze from the documents to me and back again. You knew. And why did you do it? He finally squeezed it out. A good investment in a growing sector, I shrugged. But I have to admit, it's ironic that the place you were planning to send me to is now mine. Zelma finally regained her composure. This is outrageous! She jumped up, picking up the pamphlets. You did this on purpose to humiliate us. I did it to protect myself and my business, I replied coldly. From the people who tried to manipulate me and take over what I created. Merritt tossed the folder onto the couch. You crazy old woman, he spat out. Do you really think you can keep running a business at your age? With your fits of suspicion? It's not normal to buy a whole nursing home just because you thought you were going to be sent there. I didn't, Merritt. I pointed to the brochures. You literally came here to suggest that I move there. For your own good. For your wallet, I retorted, his face contorted with rage. You'll regret this, he hissed. Any court would recognize that a man who buys a nursing home just to spite his children is out of his mind. I'll prove you incompetent. I'll get control of your business whether you want me to or not. Try me. I crossed my arms over my chest. I have the report of a full medical exam I underwent 2 weeks ago. Perfect health, including cognitive function. I have witnesses to your attempts to access my accounts. I have a recording of that conversation where you threatened to take away my business, It was a bluff. I didn't record our conversation, but judging by the way Merritt paled, it worked. You, you can't, he stammered. I can, I pointed to the door. Now, if you don't mind, I have a lot more to do today. Zelma grabbed Merritt's arm. Let's go, she hissed. We need to talk to the lawyer. They headed for the exit. On the threshold, Merritt turned around, his eyes burning with hatred. This isn't over, he said. After they left, I sank into the chair, my hands shaking. This had gone worse than I'd expected. Merritt's accusations had hit me deeper than I was willing to admit. Maybe I really was a bad mother? Maybe if I had paid more attention to him as a child, he would have grown up to be a different person. But now was no time for doubt. Merritt was explicitly threatening to sue me and trying to have me declared incompetent. I needed to defend myself. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Alan's number. Merritt was just here, I said as soon as he answered. He's threatening to sue me and want to prove I'm incompetent. I'm not surprised, Alan sighed. But don't worry, he doesn't stand a chance. Your medical report is impeccable, and the purchase of Sunset Valley is a purely business investment. There's a business plan, financial projections, everything's by the book. He's desperate, Alan, and desperate people can do a lot of things. I understand. Let's meet tomorrow and talk strategy. But Vernetta, maybe we should consider a peaceful solution. He's your son after all. I closed my eyes, remembering the fury on Merritt's face. His words about me being the CEO who accidentally gave birth to a son. I don't think a peaceful solution is possible, Alan. At least not yet. After talking to the lawyer, I sat in silence for a long time, looking at the family photo on the mantelpiece. Merritt in his graduation robe, me next to him, both of us smiling. I was really proud of him then. When did it all go wrong? It had been a rough day, and I felt every year my age. Maybe Merritt is right about something? Maybe it really is time for me to step away from things. But then I thought about Sunset Valley, about the new co-working center project, about the plans to upgrade the reservation systems with Eric. No, I'm not ready to give up yet. And I'm certainly not going to let Merritt decide when I retire. 3 months is a surprisingly short time to transform a business, but when you have money, experience, and the right contacts, the impossible becomes possible. In that time, Sunset Valley has changed beyond recognition. The East Wing has become a modern co-working center for older entrepreneurs with ergonomic furniture, high-speed internet, and state-of-the-art conference rooms. The West Wing remained residential, but it now offered a variety of affordable accommodation options, from small studios to spacious apartments. I moved into the penthouse on the top floor of the main building, a spacious apartment with panoramic windows and a terrace overlooking the well-maintained grounds. I had put the old house on the market, but I was in no hurry to lower the price, waiting for the right buyer. Merritt took my move as definitive proof that I was out of my mind. What successful businesswoman would move into a nursing home of her own free will? But I cared little. Merritt's attempt to challenge my competency in court had failed miserably. My impeccable medical records, a solid portfolio of successful business decisions over the years, and testimonials from business partners about my competence left the judge no choice but to dismiss the suit. It was a humiliating blow to Merritt, and after the hearing, he avoided any contact with me. Zelma called Eric twice, trying to find out my plans for the inheritance, but he politely avoided answering. And I had plans. With the legal threats gone, I was able to concentrate fully on business development. Eric had finalized a new reservation system for the motels, and the results had exceeded expectations. In the first month of operation, we had increased occupancy by 12%, and the average check had increased by 8% thanks to the integrated system of offering additional services. Today, we had a meeting scheduled to further develop the network. I was waiting for Eric in my home office, reviewing the financial reports for the quarter when the internal phone rang. "Mrs. Coleman, you have a visitor," the receptionist announced. "Mr. Merritt Coleman. He has no appointment but insists it's urgent." I froze. Merritt is here after 3 months of complete silence? "Let him come up," I decided after a second's hesitation. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. I opened it and saw my son. He looked different from the last time I'd seen him. He looked thin, with light stubble and a business suit that seemed a little too big. But the main difference was in his eyes. Instead of rage and arrogance, there was wariness and something like humility in them. "Hello, Merritt?" I gestured for him to come in. "To what do I owe this visit?" "Hello, Mother." He came into the living room, looking around with ill-concealed surprise. "You've settled in nicely. I've always preferred comfort, you know." He nodded, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. "I need to talk to you. It's business." "Business?" I pointed to the couch. "Have a seat. Coffee?" "No, thank you." He sat down, unbuttoned his jacket, and pulled a folder out of his briefcase. "I came to you with an offer, a business proposition." I sat down across from him, watching him carefully. Something in his demeanor had changed. There was no former aplomb, the self-confidence of a financial consultant who knows everything better than anyone else. "I'm listening." Merritt opened a folder and spread some printouts on the coffee table. "This is a business reorganization plan," he began. "I've analyzed the current state of the motel chain and see great potential for growth, but changes are required." I took the first page, running my eyes over the numbers and graphs. Surprisingly, the analysis was professional and in-depth. "Continue. The basic problem is that the Coleman Lodge brand is outdated. Motels are associated with something old-fashioned, while modern travelers prefer conceptual boutique hotels." Merritt pointed to the next page. "I propose a rebranding. Turn the motels into a chain of themed mini hotels, each with its own unique concept that reflects the local area." I leafed through the documents, simultaneously surprised and intrigued. The idea was not a bad one, although it required a substantial investment. "And where would the money for all this come from?" I asked bluntly. Merritt held my gaze. "From several sources. First, the reorganization will be phased, starting with the most promising facility. Second, I've found potential investors willing to invest in the project, provided the family retains a controlling interest. And thirdly," he paused, "I sold my house and paid off my major debts." This last admission was not easy for him. I could see it in the tense line of his shoulders. "Where do you live now?" "We rented a small apartment in the suburbs. Zelma's not happy, but, it's temporary. If the project succeeds, we can get back on our feet." I've been watching my son carefully. Something had changed in him in those 3 months. He seemed more mature, more responsible. "Why did you decide to come to me with this?" I asked. "After everything that had happened?" Merritt folded his hands in his lap. "Because it makes sense. Business sense. You own a chain of motels that need updating. I have ideas and contacts in the world of modern hospitality. Eric has created a great reservation system that will fit perfectly into the new concept. Together, we can create something really worthwhile. And what will you get out of it?" "A job," he shrugged. "A development director position with a salary to match, and a stake in the business if the project is successful." I leaned back in my chair, thinking over his words. The offer was unexpected but interesting, and surprisingly, it actually made business sense. "You know, Merritt," I said at last, "you're finally speaking a language I understand. Not about what I owe you, but what you have to offer." Something that looked like a smile flashed across his face and then disappeared. "I've been rethinking a lot of things these past months. After losing in court and selling the house," he hesitated, "I realized I'd been doing it wrong, trying to get it all at once instead of building up gradually. Like a real businessman," I said dryly. "Yeah," he grinned suddenly. "I guess it's the genes after all." At that moment, the doorbell rang. Eric came in. His surprise at seeing his father was genuine. "Dad? What are you doing here?" Merritt stood up, embracing his son awkwardly. "I have a business proposition for your grandmother, and you too, if you're interested." I watched them, father and son, passionately discussing the technical details of the project. Something about the painting touched me. Maybe it was the kind of generational connection I had once dreamed of. Not sentimental family dinners, but working together on something meaningful. "I'll consider your offer, Merritt," I said when they were done discussing it. "But I need time to check and calculate everything." "Of course," he nodded. "I understand. Business is business." "Right," I smiled. "Since you're both here, why don't you stay for lunch?" I ordered too much for one person. The suggestion was spontaneous, and I was surprised at my own words. Merritt looked equally surprised, but after a brief hesitation, he agreed. Lunch was held in an unexpectedly relaxed atmosphere. We talked mostly about business, avoiding personal topics. Merritt talked about the latest trends in the hotel industry. Eirik shared his ideas for developing the technical side of the project, and I made some suggestions for optimizing operational processes. 2 weeks later, I signed a contract with Merritt. He became director of network development with a 6-month probationary period and the possibility of a 10% stake in the business if certain targets were met. Eric became the head of technical direction, responsible for all digital aspects of the project. We chose a motel on the outskirts of the city as the first site for the reorganization, turning it into the Forest Haven, a boutique hotel with an ecological concept. Encouraged by the success, we started on the next site. The process didn't always go smoothly. There were arguments and disagreements. Merritt was sometimes impatient, I was overly cautious. But surprisingly, we found compromises, guided not by emotion but by business logic. One evening, almost 6 months after we started working together, the three of us were sitting in my office discussing strategy for the next year. Eirik was demonstrating a new analytics dashboard that showed real-time key performance indicators for each hotel. I watched them, my son and grandson, passionately discussing the future of the family business. Not a perfect family, of course. More like an effective team of professionals united by a common goal. But maybe that's how it's supposed to be? Maybe the real bond between us is not through traditional family dinners and sentimental reconciliations, but through mutual respect in a business that is important to each of us. I've always been a businesswoman to the core, and perhaps Merritt was right to accuse me of being a CEO who accidentally gave birth to a son. But now, as I watched my son grow into a competent business partner, I thought, maybe this isn't such a bad thing. Maybe my business acumen is an inheritance I've passed on to him, more valuable than just money or possessions. When they left, I walked over to the window, looking out at the manicured grounds of Sunset Valley. Restructuring is an interesting word. It applies not only to business, but also to relationships. Sometimes you have to completely change the format to keep the essence, and perhaps a business partnership is exactly the format that works for Merritt and me. Not the perfect family relationship from the glossy magazines, but a practical union based on mutual respect and a common cause. After all, isn't that what matters most? Finding a way of interacting that works for everyone involved, rather than conforming to someone else's expectations of what a mother-son relationship should be like.